In the moments following former President Donald Trump's conviction, conservative media figures took to the air to rip the verdict, slam the trial, and take aim at the judicial system.
Then we're going to vanquish the evil forces that are destroying this republic.
It's a sad day for our justice system, the best justice system ever created by man, the foundation of our constitutional republic. It's literally dying before your eyes.
So are we going to establish a precedent where the president can put his political opponent in jail? It's the type of power we usually see dictators exercise in China and Cuba and North Korea.
So some of the right's most popular names openly calling for the government to become Trump's weapon of choice for revenge against his political enemies.
Here's some of what we've seen from folks online. The Daily Wire's Matt Walsh, who's millions of social media subscribers, said Trump should, quote, make and publish a list of 10 high-ranking Democrat criminals who he will have arrested when he takes office, end quote. Sean Davis, the head of the Federalist, wrote he wants to see a list, quote, of which Democratic officials are going to be put in prison, end quote. Joining us now to talk more about this is CNN's Chris Wallace. He's host of Who's Talking to Chris Wallace on Max and The Chris Wallace Show, airing Saturday mornings here on CNN. Does any of that rhetoric surprise you?
No. Unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me. That's where it's been headed. But think how different the situation is from 8 years ago. In 2016, Donald Trump's brilliant move was to put out a list of conservative judges who he would consider to name to the Supreme Court. Now you've got right-wing commentators saying, put out a list of the top Democrats you're going to put in jail as soon as you get into office. That's a sign of how much the Republican Party and MAGA world and the political conversation in this country has changed over the last 8 years.
It seems like some of the rhetoric and some of the lines that we hear there, that just gets co-opted by some Republican officials who run with it, even some who you might suspect don't always believe it in their hearts, but that's the political messaging that they go with. How damaging do you think it really is when they're taking aim at the judicial system, especially I think of like Tim Scott saying the judicial system hunts Republicans while it protects Democrats, but Bob Menendez and Hunter Biden might think otherwise.
Well, some of the people that you showed on that screen a moment ago, I don't think know better. There are people who do know better, and I think of somebody like Tim Scott and some of the Marco Rubio knowing better. But you got to fall in line. If you're going to have a place in this Republican Party, you got to fall in line with the MAGA talking points and with Donald Trump's talking points. I mean, you had a moderate former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, who's running for the Senate in Maryland, a really blue state, and the real possibility that he can turn a blue seat red and maybe give the Republicans control of the Senate, pretty important thing. All he said yesterday was, we in this country need to respect the verdict of the jury, and one of the chairs of the Trump campaign said his campaign is finished. The point is, if you don't fall in line, you are out.
What does this do more broadly to a system that has served as a beacon of light for the world, right? A huge part of the judicial system in this country is based on the belief that it functions fairly. And if you have these leaders essentially saying that it's corrupt and a lot of people believing them without evidence, what does that do?
Boris, if you'd asked me this 4 years ago, I would have said, well, it's rhetoric, it's overheated rhetoric. The right knows how to throw red meat to its constituents, and the left knows how to do the same. But January 6th, 2021 changed everything. We saw then that rhetoric can actually turn into action, and action can turn into violence. So when you hear people talking about going after top Democratic officials, when you hear them talking about not complying with the rule of law, I think it has a different meaning, a different resonance, and a different fear factor, if you will, than it did 3 years ago.
Do you think pardon me, do you think there are guardrails that would stop President Trump from, if he's reelected, weaponizing some parts of his administration against his political rivals or enemies?
You do have the Supreme Court and you do have Congress. Of course, it depends who's in charge of Congress. But you do have to raise questions. I mean, when you look back to the investigation the House January 6th committee did, there were a few key moments there where the acting attorney general said, no, we're not going to do that, or the White House counsel said, no, we're not going to do that. And one of the concerns, I think, is that Donald Trump 2.0 isn't going to go as he did in the beginning of his first term for the respectable, the Rex Tillersons, the Jim Mattises, the H.R. McMasters. He's going to pick people, because he knows how the system works now, he's going to pick people who will toe his line and follow his orders. And under those circumstances, I think the question of guardrails becomes much more in doubt.
To your point about how much things have changed in a relatively short amount of time, somebody that didn't toe the line, Mike Pence, who certified the results of the 2020 election today, came out and basically said that this was a corrupt proceeding. The conversation has been somber, so we're going to pivot slightly. Who's talking to Chris Wallace this week?
Well, it's interesting, but it's right on these lines. We talked to Bill Maher, the very popular host of Real Time on HBO and Max, and one of the questions I wanted to ask him about was the fact that even before Trump ran the first time in 2016, he said if he's elected, he won't leave voluntarily in 2020. He won't admit that he lost. And here's that conversation. Starting in 2018, you started predicting with some regularity that if Donald Trump lost his bid for re-election in 2020, that he wouldn't leave.
I said it before he was elected the first time. I kept saying slow-moving coup. It's happening, and it's going to happen, and we see it. I mean, the stages of it. We just keep going down this road, and I noticed that the right wing now has sort of talked themselves into this idea that he's just this buffoonish comedian. He says crazy things. You know, he's always said crazy things. It's like he's not a serious person, so they don't take it seriously. And that's the problem we have, is that this is very serious, and he's running a much more serious campaign this time.
So what do you think happens if he loses this time?
Well, on January 20th, 2025, he's going to show up on Inauguration Day, whether he wins or loses, because he will claim that he won. That is the one thing I can absolutely predict with utter certainty. He will never, as I kept saying all those years, will never concede an election. He's certainly not going to concede this one.
Interestingly enough, Bill Maher, who is no fan of Donald Trump, said he thinks, now this is prior to the verdict yesterday, he thinks Trump at this moment is odds on to be reelected president. And you can watch the interview, the full interview, not right now because we're watching you, but as soon as the show is over, you can watch it on Max, where it's posted right now.
All right, we'll check that out. Chris, always great to have you, Chris Wallace. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Still plenty more news to come on CNN News Central. The vitriol isn't just reserved for politicians. We're also seeing growing anger toward jurors. CNN is learning that right now on certain online forums, people are threatening violence and are attempting to publicly identify the 12 New Yorkers who convicted the former president. Let's bring in trial consultant Richard Gabriel. Richard, you know, when jurors walked in to deliver their verdict yesterday, we're told that some had their heads hung, maybe feeling the weight of their decision. What do you think they're experiencing today?
Well, I think they're experiencing some relief that they're out of the trial, but I do think that there is some trepidation. Obviously, they know going into this trial that there's some risk about this, and I really just want to remind the public, you can disagree with the verdict, but the jurors are 12 ordinary citizens who really swore to do their job, look at the evidence, follow the judge's instructions, and do it. So I think this heated rhetoric about threatened violence towards the jurors or towards the judiciary really does threaten the entire institution of justice. And I think we need to really dial down the heated rhetoric about this. Again, plenty of room for disagreement about this, but I think it's important to honor what the process was that did arrive at this verdict.
Richard, after handing down a verdict that could potentially send a former president, or the presumptive Republican nominee, to jail, do you anticipate that members of the jury might speak about this case publicly?
It's possible that they may feel compelled to do so at some point to explain their process and their verdict. That being said, I think a lot of them are very concerned about their own personal safety, about the harassment of friends and family, and will just basically want to disappear. The judge has kept them anonymous, and even though there are threats maybe to reveal their identities, I think a lot of them just want to say, look, I did my job. I don't want to be in a public forum anymore about this, and I've done my service.
Richard Gabriel, thanks so much for spending time with us this afternoon.